All right, let's go live. Good morning, everybody. Chuck Holton here, coming to you. Well, good afternoon now. Coming to you from Panama, and I'm had a great weekend. Hope you did too. I got a lot. Boy, we got a lot to cover. I think this is going to be a very busy week because we've got Turkey invading Syria from three directions. We've got the war breaking out again between Thailand and Cambodia. We may see something happen with Venezuela, although I'm starting to kind of doubt it. And of course, there's these supposed peace talks that are happening between the United States, Russia, and marginally Ukraine. And we're going to be talking about the Ukrainian part of it today and answering the question of if Russia can actually even win. Is it even possible for Russia to win at this point? And just having come back from Ukraine, I've been working a lot on the videos that we put together while we were over there and trying to get those out to my clients at CBN and Newsmax and elsewhere. And I'm going to show you a couple of things that I've found that are kind of amazing, like mind-blowing, pretty incredible. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Do me a favor and post in the chat where you're watching from. We've got people coming in from Arizona, Illinois, Finland, Virginia, Waco, Texas, Kentucky. I got contacted by a viewer who's actually in Russia and got some interesting information from him having to do with the Russian government bolstering their reserves of gold. They're up to $300 billion in gold. And that sounds like, oh man, Russia must be doing great. They're buying lots of gold. But actually, most of that is in Europe, where Russia can't get at it right now. Part of that $300 billion that is, Russian money that's invested in Europe that they've had sanctioned, for some time. But, obviously that gets me thinking about our sponsor, Preserve Gold. A lot of people think that they're investing just because they have a 401k or a couple of stocks. I wasn't going to put that up there just yet. Let's stop that. I'll get to that in a second. I want to tell you about something new I've got going with Preserve Gold. But you know what? The uncomfortable truth is that most Americans are not actually diversifying. In fact, more than 40% of people don't even monitor their portfolios. So that's how you end up unknowingly piling everything into one lane and then acting surprised when the market dip wipes out months of your gains. It doesn't have to be like that. One of the simplest ways to stabilize a portfolio is to add assets that don't move in sync with the stock market. That's exactly where precious metals come in. Gold and silver and platinum, palladium, whatever. They've been around longer than any of our modern investment vehicles, and they behave differently when markets get jumpy. And if markets have been anything this year, it's jumpy. So while stocks and bonds are riding an emotional roller coaster, precious metals tend to hold their ground. And even a small allocation from your portfolio can add balance to things and reduce your risk and give you a little more confidence that, one bad week on Wall Street is not going to take your whole ship down with it. Now, if you're realizing your portfolio might be a bit one-dimensional, like you've got it all in one mutual fund or something like that, Preserve Gold has a free wealth protection guide that walks you through how metals can help. So just to get that, you text the word Chuck on your phone. Go to your phone, go to your text messaging app, and write the word Chuck, and then send it to the number 50505. Text Chuck to 50505, and Preserve Gold will get back to you, and we'll help you figure out if gold is right for you. They only deal in physical gold and silver, so they're not dealing with paper contracts that are going to evaporate at the first sign of trouble or anything like that. So I wanted to show you this because Preserve Gold now has me on their webpage as a, endorser, along with Charlie Kirk, Dr. Phil, and yours truly right there on their website. So thank you to Preserve Gold for seeing fit to put my mug on your website. That's not exactly like model material right there. at least not when I'm in combat mode. But so my wife likes it. Let's just put it that way. Connie likes it. All right. Speaking of Connie, I wanted to let you also know that we're setting up a tour to Panama. It's really more of a retreat coming up in April. They sent me this great graphic. If you want to join my wife and I in our hometown up here in the mountains of Panama, where it's nice and cool all summer long, all year long, cool, but it's not freezing. That's one of the reasons Connie likes it here. We were sitting up on the roof last night, and Connie was just like, I just don't think there's any place on earth that I could love more than sitting right here on the roof of this house. And I have to agree. Where did that go? I just put, oh, I guess it can't. I wanted to show you a picture I took last night, but it looks like it's not going to upload. It may have a problem uploading. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. But anyway, you can join Connie and I in Panama from April 9th to the 14th. And all you have to do is go to that link there on the, or you can email info@holtonnews.com, but the link is holtonnews.com/Panama, and get all the information about the tour. And we've got a few rooms left. So now our tour to Armenia is completely booked, and we have a waiting list, but Panama has still got a few slots open. So if you want to come with us, get signed up quickly for that one. Oh, here's the picture. It did finally load. That's the picture I took from our balcony last night here at the house. And I don't know about you, but I think God is the best artist in the universe. I mean, it's just unbelievable how God paints a picture like that every night and then just wipes it away and does a new one the next night. Doesn't even save it. I hope there's a repository somewhere in heaven of all the great sunsets that God has given to the people that he loves on planet Earth. So, all right, now let's move on. We're going to talk about whether or not Russia can even win this war at all. And I've ran some numbers here, and it's actually just mind-boggling. It's pretty sad. Now, President Trump was asked in a press conference, or I don't know, he was somewhere and was asked about the peace process. And I want to talk about that as well. So let's hear from President Trump first.
Russia-Ukraine talks after last week's negotiations.
So we've been speaking to President Putin, and we've been speaking to Ukrainian leaders, including Zelensky, President Zelensky. And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it. Russia, I guess, would rather have the whole country when you think of it. But Russia is, I believe, fine with it. But I'm not sure that Zelensky's fine with it. His people love it, but he hasn't read it. So someday you'll explain that one to me, Jeff.
Yeah. So now, as we all know, I don't know that we can really take President Trump at his word. I'm absolutely positive from all of the history that they have between the United States and President Zelensky, that Zelensky's not going to just ignore any proposal that comes across his desk. If he didn't read it, it's probably because he didn't have a chance to read it. They just given it to him. They have been changing that proposal. They went from an original, I think, 28 points, and they're down to 19 points now. But the thing is, he says, Russians are fine with it, although they'd really rather have the whole country. That's an understatement extraordinaire. Now, I don't believe the Russians are actually fine with it, because the Russians have been doing this all along. Every time that there's it doesn't have to be brought by President Trump, brought by anybody, a proposal for peace. The Russian playbook is you act interested, you string them along as long as possible, and then you just keep doing your thing. How do I know that? Well, I mean, Russia is not showing any signs of trying to, come to an agreement. They haven't made any concessions whatsoever in this process. And so the original agreement was literally written first in Russian. They've proven that by the way it was translated. And they really believe that it was written by Russia and it was sent to the United States. But even if it wasn't, it was right out of the Russian playbook. It gave Russia everything that they wanted out of this, this war. And it's now been pared down to 19 points. But if those points include things like limiting the size of the Ukrainian military, giving up land that the Ukrainians currently hold, and et cetera, it's a non-starter. I can just tell you right now, Ukraine is building momentum on the battlefield. And even though Russia is making small gains, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. They're making small gains on the battlefield. The truth of the matter is Ukraine is at a position now where they're probably better off if they keep fighting at the moment. Now, I want to play this right here because Colonel McGregor, who is a diehard Russophile and has been just stratospherically wrong on everything that he said in the last 4 years, not just about Ukraine, but about Israel as well. You remember Colonel McGregor was the one who said that Tel Aviv was 30% destroyed, that a third of Tel Aviv was in ruins during the 12-day war. And I went there and showed you, like, you drove around Tel Aviv, you couldn't find any place that was ruined. Like, you had to know where it was. We had to ask around and go find a place where a missile had landed. And McGregor, not having been there, claiming that 30% of a city of 4 million people has been destroyed is absolutely ridiculous. So here's another ridiculous statement from him. And I have to say that looking at his countenance as he makes this claim, you have to wonder if he didn't down a fifth of Jack Daniels right before the interview with the judge on Napolitano.
Truth is, number one, the war is won. Russia has won. If you want to stop the bleeding, if you want to have some sort of impact on how much further the Russians go in terms of absorbing territory, then sit down and admit that the war is over, that they've won, and hammer out some sort of solution. Because if you don't, this nonsense sponsored by MI6, the CIA, and Mossad in Kiev is going to continue. And as it continues, the Russians will move forward until they're confident that they have secured enough space, not just territory, but space, frankly, that allows them to feel secure as a nation.
Well, look, so you notice how he stuck the Mossad in there. He had to blame the war on the Jews, of course, because that makes a ton of sense, right? He's saying that Russia has already won. They've won the war. I mean, the war's essentially over. They just have to kind of mop up now. That is so unbelievably ridiculous. It's hard to even put it into words. As a matter of fact, it'd be better to put it into images. The problem is I can't show you those images here on YouTube because I'll get completely banned from YouTube if I show you how graphic the front lines are right now. But just for you, I put up the videos over at chuckholton.com. So if you're a supporter at chuckholton.com, you can go over there and you can see 2 videos that I put up today of trench line that is absolutely full of Russian bodies and body parts. It's just strewn everywhere. This is around Pokrovsk. There are dozens and dozens, at least 20 that I counted, of Russian bodies just littered all over the landscape. And also, if you look closely, when you watch those videos, you can see how many fiber optic cables there are going across the trench where most of those bodies are. That's from the fiber optic drones that both sides are using. But you have to be a supporter at chuckholton.com to be able to see those. That's how we pay the bills around here, folks. If you go to chuckholton.com, become a supporter, you can keep us on the air and get lots of extra stuff. We're going to be doing a giveaway, 12 days of Christmas giveaway coming up very soon for our supporters over at the locals page there at chuckholton.com. So you're going to want to go become a supporter if you're not already. However, I wish that I could show you these videos. I'll warn you ahead of time, they're not for the faint of heart. They're very graphic, but they just show how incredibly many people Russia is losing in this war. Now, I did some calculations on that, and I want to go through that now. So Russia, let me see, I got to find my notes here. Russia's 2025 territorial gains amount to about 1,800 square kilometers. And that might sound like a lot. However, when you put it in perspective, because Ukraine's a large country, that's only 0.3% of Ukrainian territory that Russia has managed to take this year. In so doing, Russia's military dead. They've lost between 115,000 and 130,000 men dead. Not okay. So the total number of casualties for just this year, 2025, is over 400,000 men. This is there's a band here. You know, I mean, it could be 300,000, it could be 500,000, but most estimates put it around 400,000. And 400,000 is dead, wounded, missing, and captured. The problem is Russia is not recovering its dead. They're just leaving them on the battlefield to rot. And so there are huge WhatsApp groups inside Russia right now, and starting to see protests and stuff from Russian mothers saying, I haven't heard from my son in 3 years, but you won't declare him dead, because if you do, you're going to have to pay out his death benefit. And Russia has gotten to the point where they've stopped paying those death benefits for their soldiers. But just imagine that. Imagine a city of 400,000 people. You ever been to a city like, Cleveland or someplace like that? That's a large city. And that's how many people have become casualties in this war from the Russian side. Now, what that means is that they're having 65 to 72 soldiers killed for every square kilometer that they take. And that number has gotten much slower. I mean, it's gotten much bigger. When I was there a year ago tomorrow, I think, Nathan and I were in Kramatorsk. The Russians were losing, I don't know, about 30 to 50 men per kilometer. Now it's 65 to 70 men per kilometer. And at the current rate, conquering the rest of Ukraine, back then, a year ago, we were saying it would take them 65 years to conquer Ukraine at a cost of something like 5 to 6 million dead. At the rate that they've been losing men in 2025, you're talking about it would take Russia 250 to 287 years to take the whole of Ukraine at their current rate. And they would take 80 million casualties. That's about half the number of people that live in Russia. They don't have that many men. And now look, there can be breakthroughs. There can be things that happen. There's in war, it's always, up in the air. There's 1,000 things that can happen that nobody can plan for that could shift this war like that, either direction. But so what I'm saying is you have to kind of take these numbers with a grain of salt. But here's the most important statistic of all. and that is the number of Ukraine's military dead in 2025 compared to Russia's, okay? Because that number will likely stay about the same as long as the war goes on. Ukraine has likely lost about 15,000 men this year alone. Okay, but 15,000 men as opposed to 115 or 130,000 men, their losses are 1/10 as large as Russia's are. Okay. Now, these are numbers that are pretty well established by open source intelligence, national intelligence services like the MI6 and the CIA and others, and NGOs like Bellingcat that make it their job to do this by extrapolating from obituaries and things like that are coming out, because neither nation releases the numbers of their own dead. That would be a kind of operational security hazard for them to do that. But the long and the short of it is Russia is losing men about 8 to 10 times faster than Ukraine is. Now, anytime you have a war where one side is defending its territory and the other side is trying to conquer that territory, the aggressor in that situation is going to lose more men. Usually it's 2 to 3 times as many men lost as the defenders are. Why? Well, because the defenders are in defensive positions. They dig holes in the ground, and so they're not as exposed as the guys that are running across the fields trying to get to those trench lines. Also, they're fighting for a reason. The motivation factor is huge. Take it from a soldier. If you're fighting because you love the people behind you, you're going to fight much harder than if you're fighting because you hate the people in front of you. And that's exactly what this war is all about. The Russians are fighting because they are being forced to. I don't think there are not very many Russians left in the Russian military that are happy to be fighting Ukraine. If given the chance, the Russian army would pack up right now and go home. I believe, by and large. Now, there are a few diehards, I'm sure, but by and large, they would pack up and go home. And I know that because they're putting out videos from the front lines. The Russian soldiers are putting out videos and saying, I'm the only survivor of my entire unit, and I'm cut off here on the front lines. I've got no food. I've got no water. I don't know what to do. Somebody help, please send help. And there are even whole units that are getting together and filming videos to send back to Russia, begging Vladimir Putin to give them the support that they need if they want to take the country, right? So Russia's population can't support continuing this war for much longer. Just that's not opinion. That's just arithmetic. Okay. If you run the numbers, they've already lost 3 million people since 2022 who have fled the country to keep from having to fight in the war. And those were their best and brightest. Okay. They're the ones that are working in the tech sector, ones that are working remotely in the United States, overseas, or whatever. They've all moved out of Russia. They've left. That's 3 million people. The casualties that they've taken in this war not only have hollowed out the breeding stock, if you will, of the Russian people, but it's even worse than that, because the highest casualty regions, if you were to map out where the casualties, where the people fighting in Ukraine are being drawn from, they're actually being drawn from the highest birth rate regions in Russia. And that means that it's killing their birth rate even more. And so even if the war stops today, Russia faces irreversible demographic collapse. And so that might beg the question, like, why are they then threatening NATO? What are they doing threatening NATO? Well, what they're trying to do to threaten NATO is kind of a diplomatic bluff. Russia does not want to go to war with NATO. Vladimir Putin said so himself. As a matter of fact, I got a video of him talking about this. He said, we're not going to fight with Europe. I've already said it 100 times. But if Europe suddenly wants to fight us and starts, we are ready right now. So, obviously you would expect him to say, well, yeah, we're ready to fight anytime, anywhere, bring it, But he says there, look, we don't want to fight Europe, but if they want to fight us, there may be a war. Now, there have been lots and lots of threats from Russia against NATO, against Europe. There have been a tremendous amount of incursions now by Russian drones into European countries, into NATO countries. There have been people killed by those drones during this war. There have even been incursions by fighter jets and bombers coming into NATO territory near Estonia. And so Europe is saying, we've got to take this seriously. It looks like we may actually have to fight Russia. And we've talked before about whether or not Europe is ready for that fight. And I don't think, except for Poland, that they really are, totally ready, but you're never really ready for a war. But even in the state that Europe's forces are in now, they would wipe the floor with what's left of the Russian army after the Ukrainians have gotten done with them. There's no question about that. Now, assuming that, of course, Russia likes to threaten nuclear retaliation, if anything happens. I mean, they've done this probably 24 times since the war began. Oh, if the United States sends HIMARS, we're going to send, we're going to go nuclear. If the United States sends M777s, we're going to go nuclear. If the United States does this, if they allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, that's a red line. We're going to go nuclear. They keep saying it and they're not doing it. They're not going to do it because they know that firing a nuclear missile would mean the end of Russia completely. It would be bad for both sides, but that would be, look, the nuclear missiles, as I always say, only work as a deterrent weapon. They're not an actual weapon that you want to use. So Russia doesn't have a military plan to conquer Europe with its military. But what they do want to do is control Europe geopolitically. They want to be able to manipulate Europe geopolitically. And that's why they're engaged in this asymmetric war against Europe right now and have been for some time. As a matter of fact, have a video about that somewhere here. Yeah, listen to this one.
The negotiations that been taking place between the Americans and the
Russians. This has to do with,
what do you think the White
Putin
House
and Trump.
is doing? Are they playing a smart game or are they being played by Putin?
They're being totally played. I mean, Putin despises Trump. I mean, as far as he's concerned, he's a useful idiot. It's just like Lenin's version. And we know this, for example, from the Osaka conference in 2019, when Putin was starting to tease Trump. He said to him, Mr. Trump, I've done much more for Israel than people realize. And Trump slammed the table and said, nobody's done as much for Israel as I have. And Putin said, President Trump, perhaps they should rename their country after you. And Putin, Trump looked at him in astonishment for a moment and then said, no, I think that would be going a bit too far. Well, that was all recorded by Fiona Hill, who was sitting in on the conversation.
So this is just making the point that President Trump is getting played by Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is not interested in stopping the war right where it is. Even the conditions that are in the 19-point plan That's not good enough for Russia. And again, Russia economically just can't, they've painted themselves into a corner. They can't afford to stop the war. They've got to keep fighting. And this peace plan, if it was accepted by Ukraine and accepted by Russia, both sides accepted it, I guarantee you the two sides would be back at war again in a short period of time, because all it would do would be to cede territory to Russia that right now it's costing them 60 to 75 soldiers per square kilometer to capture. And it would give up the what's known as the fortress belt of Ukraine. Now, I want to show you a picture of the fortress belt. Nathan and I, when we went over there a couple weeks ago, we saw this fortress belt, and it's more than what I'm about to show you, but this is what it looks like here. It's a bunch of dragon's teeth with a bunch of concertina wire and then a huge trench. And this travels all along the front lines, but somewhere behind the front lines. However, there's more to it than that. The fortress belt actually includes 3 or 4 very important cities that, let's see if I have it here. There we go. 3 or 4 very important cities. This is a map from Institute for the Study of War. But you look at the bottom map there where it shows Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and those other two are really small. Oh, Druzhkivka and Konstantinivka. That constellation of cities has been highly, highly fortified. And they've been working on that not since the beginning of the war in 2022. They've been working on those fortifications since 2011. And this is before the 2014 war. The war actually started in 2008. And so Ukraine saw this coming, and they've been fortifying that belt of cities for more than 10, 15 years. And I've seen the fortifications, and they are massive. So with all the trouble, look, you see down there in the corner, down at the southern part of that bottom map, I wish I could make that a little larger for you, but you can see down there where where Pokrovsk is in a little pocket. Okay, so the Russians have almost surrounded Pokrovsk. The Russians have been trying to take Pokrovsk since the beginning of this year. Pokrovsk is a city of like 20,000 people. And they have not been able to fully capture Pokrovsk this year. Now, last year, Nathan and I went to Pokrovsk on our way further south and, drove through there. But I'm telling you, if it took Russia 400,000 casualties to almost take Pokrovsk in 1 year, it would take them far more time and casualties to take the region, the rest of the Donetsk and Luhansk region, which includes that fortress belt. But if they can talk President Trump into pressuring Vladimir Zelensky to give away the rest of Donetsk and Luhansk province, you can see in that map on the bottom there, the dark gray part is the part that Russia would control. And so they would jump over that fortress belt and wouldn't have to have men die trying to take it. That would set them up for a breakout move on Ukraine where they could run all the way to Kyiv, or all the way to, well, I guess from there it'd be to Dnipro. And that's just not feasible for Ukraine. It's a non-starter. Now, President Trump himself has said that the United States is no longer providing aid to Ukraine. That's actually not true. there are several packages that have been allocated previously that are being released to Ukraine. And that's part of, what was allocated under the Biden administration. And it's somewhere in the couple $100 million worth of military help. It's not cash, but it's military help. And you've heard me talk about this a lot, that the amount of money that President Trump says that we've given to Ukraine is completely fabricated. He keeps using this number, $350 billion. Go do some research. There is absolutely no place where the United States has even agreed to give, even pledged to give $350 billion to Ukraine. The real number is like $135 billion. And of that $135 billion, most of it went to buy the Pentagon new equipment. So we gave, I've quoted this one a lot before, if you've watched this show before, but we gave Ukraine $3.8 billion at the beginning of the war of U.S. equipment, weapons and ammunition and stuff. And we were actually doing that before the war even started. But then we allocated $9.8 billion to give to the Pentagon to buy new stuff. Now, their old stuff that they were giving away to Ukraine was getting ready to be demolished or destroyed anyway, or given or sold off or whatever. Okay, so that money did not go to Ukraine. It never entered the Ukrainian territory. That money went to the Pentagon, that $9.8 billion. There was another $4.2 billion that was spent moving U.S. troops into areas closer to the Ukrainian border in Hungary and Poland and Lithuania and places like that. That $4.2 billion went to feed and house the American troops that we sent out there under the Biden administration. That money did not go to Ukraine, did not go into Ukraine. The Ukrainians never saw that. So a lot of people are saying now, oh gosh, they have this big scandal that's going on in Ukraine about the $100 million of contracts in which there were kickbacks taken by some people who were known to the president, President Zelensky. Now, President Zelensky has not been implicated in those charges. And the only question you really need to ask about that, because look, corruption happens. And especially when you're dealing with tens or hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into a country like that, that's in a war where it's hard to keep up with everything because fog of war and all that. There's going to be some level of corruption. There was a lot more than what we're seeing in Ukraine. In Afghanistan during the war there was a lot more that took place where U.S. money was misspent or mishandled or downright stolen in Iraq during the war there than we've seen in Ukraine. And I have a video coming out on that here shortly. But it's not surprising to hear that there is some graft, fraud, abuse, or corruption happening in the war in Ukraine, because there's so many billions of dollars getting poured in there. The question you need to ask is, number one, what is Ukraine doing about it? And number two, who was it that broke the story? Who was it that did the investigation and found out that there was corruption and then told the world? And that will tell you everything you need to know about this event within Ukraine. And the answer is, it was the Ukrainian anti-corruption unit. There are two different anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine. And they were the ones who uncovered this kickback scheme with Energatom, the nuclear energy agency in Ukraine. So the anti-corruption organizations within the Ukrainian government, whose job it is to track down corruption and root it out, did their job, found corruption, and the people responsible are being arrested and fired, even up to and including the president's chief of staff. He was, Andrei Yermak was asked to step down when he was implicated in the investigation. He has not been charged. He's not been arrested yet. And you know, that may happen. And so far, and for his part, President Zelensky has not been implicated at all. That I haven't been able to find any place that has implicated Zelensky in this particular scheme. And Zelensky has had people that were friends of his arrested for doing this, and literally came out and made a statement and said, look, I can't be friends with people that put their own interests ahead of our country. Now, maybe at some point in the near future, Zelensky gets implicated in this. Maybe this blows up into something much bigger and leads to Zelensky's downfall. If Zelensky was involved, then he needs to go. He should be impeached. He should be taken out. Now they have a continuity of government put in place for something like that if that were to happen. But so far, President Zelensky is not implicated in that corruption scheme at all. He's actually driving the train in terms of the investigation. Okay. Now the Kremlin has a big problem here, and in that their economic situation is getting worse by the day. There was an article I read from The Economist today about how China is essentially stocking up on Russian oil because they are getting it at $5 to $6 a barrel cheaper than the current going rate for crude oil worldwide, which is I think right around $70, maybe a little below that. But that's $5 to $6 difference is huge, and it puts Russia in a position where it's actually pulling oil out of the ground at a loss. When you add up the cost of extraction, the cost of transportation and sales, distribution, they're actually losing money on that oil. So China is getting hit with secondary sanctions, and that's actually making a difference. But China has decided that it would be better to swallow the sanctions for a short period of time and just load up on as much oil as they can from Russia. And then what's going to happen, though, is that their capacity is going to be full, and they're going to stop buying oil altogether from Russia in probably the near future, in the next several months. When that happens, Russia is going to be really in a bad way, okay? Because they can't turn their pumps off. They can't stop pumping the oil, because if they do, they won't be able to turn those pumps back on again, because they don't have the technology to do it. They needed Western technology to get those pumps running in the first place. And so what you're going to actually see, if Russia can't find buyers for its crude, is they're going to start pumping it onto the ground, just pumping it out and making a giant ecological disaster up there in Siberia in the north. Okay. Now let's listen to this thing. This is talking about, Russia in terms, this is an interview with a pundit about Russia invading other countries.
Is no neighboring country of Russia has attacked Russia, but Russia has invaded 19 neighboring countries. So there's no reason to believe that Putin will change course just now.
So that's a nice short one there, but they have invaded 19 countries. They've never been invaded since World War II. So the real gross thing about this is that President Trump keeps saying that Zelensky started the war. I don't know what he's even talking about. I mean, I was there when the war started. I was actually with Zelensky about 2 days before the war started. And Zelensky didn't start this war. And just ask yourself, how many Ukrainian troops are inside Russia right now? There might be a couple, might be a few, partisans in there, saboteurs, things like that. But I mean, there's no concerted threat on the Russian mainland right now by Ukraine. That should tell you everything you need to know. The Ukrainians did not start this war. And as we always say, if Russia stops fighting tomorrow, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting tomorrow, Ukraine ends. And Ukrainians can't handle that. Now, talking about the secondary sanctions on Russia, Tony Perkins had a guest on his show who was commenting on it, and I wanted to play this clip for you as well.
Sanctions on India, China using this Russian oil are tightened. That could cut off the spigot of their funding for their war machine.
Well, that's correct, Tony. Let's recall that right now there are countries in the world. India is one of them. You correctly mentioned them. China is another. There are other European countries as well. They are paying Russia with energy revenues. Russia is using that money to fund its war machine. If we squeeze at Putin's weakest point, his energy revenues, that's the surest way to say, no, you must stop this war. We can cut Russia off at the knees by restricting its energy revenue. We haven't been effective yet, Tony, in doing that. But as you heard from Congress yesterday, it is possible. It is in our toolkit. That's what must be done now.
So, Peter, is the NATO chief in NATO, are they speaking out of both sides of their mouth, saying that, hey, as European countries, we've got to put in more money into our defense. They want to see 5% into defense. But at the same time, they're funding Russia by buying the oil.
Unfortunately, that's true, Tony. Get this stat. It's disturbing. It should be disturbing to everyone. The Europeans have spent as much, the same amount of money that the Europeans have sent to the Ukrainians is about equal to what they have sent to the Russians since 2022, when this war really started heating up. So essentially, the Europeans are funding both sides of this war right now. That's got to stop.
Okay, so he makes some good points there. The Europeans buying natural gas and oil from Russia is an unfortunate byproduct of the fact that the Europeans have essentially shut down almost all of their own ability to generate electricity without that oil and natural gas. And not just electricity, but fertilizer and all sorts of things. In the pursuit of net zero, the environmental greeny stuff, Europe has kind of hamstrung itself to keep try to what am I trying to say? They've hamstrung themselves by making themselves far too dependent on Russian oil and natural gas. Stopping that immediately was really not an option. Now, because that was my question. Like, why didn't Europe just stop buying all Russian natural gas and oil immediately when the invasion happened? The war would be over by now. Well, it's not as simple as that, because if they had done that, it would have caused a spike in the price of oil that would have actually almost made up for the loss of the business for Russia. Russia would have made so much more money per barrel that it wouldn't have actually hurt them that bad. So what Europe's been trying to do is slowly wean themselves off of Russian oil and stop funding the war on both sides. But they believe that funding the war is worth doing, and so they've been stepping up the amount of money and weapons and stuff that they've shipped to Ukraine to try to keep Ukraine afloat while they wean themselves off of Russian oil and natural gas. Ursula von der Leyen is not a person that I like very much, not a person that I agree with very much, but here she is the other day announcing that they're finally, they see the light at the end of the tunnel. They're going to be Thank you, MM. I just saw that $20. I appreciate that. They're going to be finally weaning themselves off of Russian energy completely, but it's still going to take almost a year to do.
A historic day for our union. Last night, we reached a provisional agreement on the Commission's proposal to fully phase out Russian fossil fuels. We're turning that page, and we're turning it for good. This is the dawn of a new era, the era of Europe's full energy independence from Russia. Many believe this would be impossible. Well, the figures speak for themselves, and let me give you some. Today, Russian gas imports, so LNG and pipeline, are down from 45% at the beginning of the war to 13%. Coal imports are down from 51% at the beginning of the war to now 0%. And crude oil imports are down from 26% to 2% today. I always knew that we could deliver with unity, with resolve, and by building on the extraordinary work of the past 3 years. As we slashed Russian imports of fossil fuels massively, we also cut the revenues that Russia uses to wage its war of aggression against Ukraine. We were paying to Russia 12 billion euros per month at the beginning of the war for fossil fuels.
12 billion a
Now
month.
we're down to 1.5 billion per month. Still too much. We aim to bring it down to 0.
Okay, so that's Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union saying that they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. They may bring it down to 0. Now, I wanted to catch this comment real quick and talk about it. I'm going to be answering all your questions here in a minute. But this is Liza Roadwaller or somebody says, I can't agree with that war. The Minsk agreements were totally shoved aside. Russia had the right to be furious. Europe and Biden poked the bear, and we had to pay for it. Not right. Okay. What are the Minsk agreements? What is this person talking about? And is she correct? I'm assuming it's a she, that Ukraine shoved aside the Minsk agreements. And so the Minsk agreement, there were actually 2 Minsk agreements, 2014 and 2015. And they were signed to stop the fighting in the Donbas region after Russia seized Crimea and then backed separatists inside Donetsk and Luhansk. And there were like 13 points in the second one in 2015 that included an immediate ceasefire, pullback of heavy weapons from the front line, monitoring of the ceasefire by an organization called the OSCE, dialogue on local elections in the separatist areas, and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, who broke them? Well, both sides violated parts of the Minsk agreements, but the violations were very different in nature. Let me explain what I mean by that. Russia never fully stopped shooting. I mean, I was there right before the war started, and Russia was still shooting across into Ukraine. So there were daily ceasefire violations between 2015 and 2021. They never allowed the OSCE to monitor the Russian side of the border properly. They never withdrew their regular Russian troops or their heavy weapons. They integrated the republics deeper into Russia by making them spend rubles instead of hryvnia, by giving people Russian passports, subsidizing things inside the area instead of returning them to Ukraine. They refused to hold elections under Ukrainian law or OSCE standards. Now, Ukraine passed a special status law in 2014, but let it expire and then repeatedly extended it only symbolically instead of making it permanent in the Constitution. They never held the required local elections in the occupied areas. They kept economic blockades on the separatist areas. The Russians called that a violation. It wasn't actually a violation of the Minsk agreements, but Russians called that a violation. And they continued to have a military presence and fortifications along the front line. If they didn't, Russia would have kept pushing. You say the Minsk agreements were totally shoved aside. They were totally shoved aside by Russia. There were some things that Ukraine was supposed to do they didn't do. That's true. But the more egregious violations were definitely on the Russian side, not on the Ukrainian side. So that's that. All right. Now let's get to some questions. I got so much more, but I just can't get to everything. First question from Country Boy 316: Is it true there was a ramming at a Christmas market? Yes, but it was in a French territory of Guadeloupe. There was a ramming that I think 19 people were injured. There were no deaths that took place. Now, there have also been, if you watched my live talking about the war on Christmas, there have also been a couple more takeovers of Christmas markets. There was one in Berlin that was taken over, and I forget where the other one was, but there's still happening. So everything I said in that live turned out to be not just right, but prescient. Okay, next question. Come on, Nate. Russia is so cooked. How can they even sustain this war? Well, they're sustaining this war by bringing in a tremendous number of replacements, and those replacements are not from Russia. They're not Russian replacements. As a matter of fact, I have a video here that a guy filmed and put out of Russia. Nate, take some of the ones I've used down because I can't put up any more. So I'm trying to add it and I'll show it to you. What Russia's doing is they're replacing their population now with people from outside of their territory, from outside of Russia. And what you see in this video, if I could get it loaded.
I can't take anything
You
out
can't
that
take
you
them
put
down.
on there.
All right,
down.
I'll
Can't
take them. I got it. Okay. Let's take that. I maxed out the number of videos I had up there and couldn't show you any more. There it is. Okay. So this video shows what this guy is saying. I'm going to turn this down. What he's saying is that these are all foreigners in line for jobs inside Russia. They're lining up to do jobs that there are no Russians left to do. And these people are from Indonesia, from Asia, from Armenia, from all over, from India, from China, from North Korea. And they are being hired to do jobs inside Russia now because there are not enough Russians left to actually do those jobs. So obviously, Russia is in terminal demographic decline. They're not going to come back from that. But what they're going to do is they're going to replace it's going to be like London before too long. In the 1960s, England was about 96% white people and people that were not of British descent, not white people from India and elsewhere were like, 4%. Now it's like, I think right now they're like 26% are white and the rest are foreigners. And you go to London and it's like a foreign country and you don't know what country, because it's like they took every foreign country and just dumped it into London. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, some amount of migration is going to be necessary for most countries in the Western world, including the United States, because none of us are having babies fast enough. But my point is that Russia is going to look very, very different in about 50 years. It's not going to be Russia as it's known today. The next question, the world's largest nation needs more space to feel safe. That's a good point. McGregor made that point when I played his video here, and where he said, Russia's already won the war, and they're going to keep fighting. If they don't make a deal, they're going to keep pushing until they have enough space for themselves to feel safe. Well, look, if my neighbors in my neighborhood here in Panama play their music too loud, and they're always having parties and lighting off fireworks and keeping me awake at night and stuff. I have every right to appeal to competent authorities to try to do something about that. What I don't have the right to do is go next door and burn their house down. If I don't feel safe because there's some sketchy guy that lives in the apartment, next to me. Okay, well, I could maybe try to get a restraining order. I could maybe, arm myself so that I can defend myself if necessary. But I don't have the right to go over there and massacre that guy and his family just because he sketches me out. No country has the right to do that in order to feel safe. Okay. Next question. Keep going, Nate. Come on, stay ahead of me. Is North Korea still sending troops to Russia? Yes, they are. Russia is buying troops from North Korea, and that's a one-way trip. Those guys, by and large, don't go back ever. Question from Belgium. Why should Europe be at war in the following years if Russia can't go any further? I don't believe that Russia will attack NATO. I think they're going to continue with their bluster. They're going to continue with their asymmetric war against Europe. And that asymmetric war may rise to a level at some point where Europe feels like they have to take kinetic action against Russia to put a stop to it. And then Russia will be able to say, we didn't start the war, Europe started the war. No, look, you remember when you were a kid and your little brother just used to bug you all the time, and he used to just bother you and bother you and bother you and pick 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 when your parents weren't looking, until you just got fed up and turned around and backhanded him. And then he went, "Ah, Mom, ah," and then you were the one that got in trouble because your little brother was screaming. They didn't see what he was doing. That's what Russia's trying to do with Europe right now. They're attacking Europe in the cyber realm, in the information realm, in the cultural realm, in the economic realm, and even via sabotage against important sites inside Europe. And it may get to a point where Europe says, we're going to start sending missiles your way if that doesn't stop. Let's hope it doesn't. But I don't think you're going to see Russia make a preemptive strike against NATO, because it's just that would be pretty much the end of the Russian army. And it would be the end of the war in Ukraine too, by the way. Okay, keep going, Nate. Where are we? What do you think could be the best way for America to help end the war besides failed peace talks? Just wondering, well, the best way America could end the war would be to put pressure on oil prices to make them go down. And to his credit, President Trump has been doing that. So we put more pressure on the oil prices and we starve Russia of the ability to buy anything, more soldiers, more weapons, more anything. And that eventually will cause the Russian economy to collapse. And right now, it's like the politicians are playing this stupid balancing act where they're like just trying to give Ukraine just enough so it can keep fighting, but not quite enough where it can win. And they're trying to crack down on Russia just a little bit at a time instead of just going whole hog. And that's one thing I've never understood about this war. Lois says, Benny is saying Zelensky may resign. Also, some of his closest people resigned. Any truth? Andrei Yermak, who I've met, I mean, I've spoken with him multiple times. Andrei Yermak resigned when he was implicated in this investigation, this corruption investigation. Now, there's conflicting reports whether he was asked to resign or he resigned on his own. I'm going to believe he was asked to resign. Andrei Yermak was the chief of staff for the Zelensky administration. Now, Zelensky's not implicated in this. And so I haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that Zelensky is about to step down. If Zelensky were implicated in this, then he might. But so far he's not. He's been the one who's calling for the investigations. Okay, do they have a blackout on the internet in Russia? Yes. Russia has limited Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, I think they've TikTok. I mean, a whole bunch of well-known apps have been blocked in Russia. And what they're trying to do is keep Russians from being able to get the truth about what's actually happening in this war, how many people are being lost, and that sort of thing. Trying to, keep the wool over the Russians' eyes. So, yes, it is limited to just what he wants his people to hear. Next, there's some info out there on YouTube that the Russian oligarchs are buying up Russia's gold reserves. Yes, I've heard that too. And that means that Russia is selling its gold reserves. They've sold about half of the total reserves that they had in their national wealth fund, which is like a sovereign wealth fund. They've drawn that down by about 50%. And they're doing that to fund the war. So they're essentially funding the war now because their oil revenues are not enough to pay for the war. They're doing that out of their savings account, and they have less than a year at the rate that they're burning that to be able to survive. Although Sergio Gore has now been posted to India, do you believe he or other Russian sympathizers are behind the hideous peace deal that President Trump's obvious antipathy toward President Zelensky? Obviously, there are people in the Trump administration who are whispering really wormwoody things into President Trump's ear about Ukraine. That's why he keeps making false statements about Ukraine, like they started the war and stuff like that. Now, the upshot of that is that Trump has essentially removed himself in many ways from the process. Now, everybody is pandering to Trump. Everybody is sort of humoring him in these peace talks, negotiations. But Russia is not serious about agreeing to any peace negotiation that is short of them winning the war. And Ukraine can't agree to the peace negotiations as they're currently stipulated. Zelensky has been getting more and more aid from Europe. There have been the Australians and the Norwegians and all kinds of places that are really ramping up their spending on the war in Ukraine. And so they've largely made up for what the United States is no longer giving to Ukraine. But Ukraine's still getting American equipment. It's just being purchased by Europe and then given to Ukraine that way. And that's honestly, I think that's probably a better way to do it for the United States. I don't have a problem with that. I think that, it's fine if we can strike a deal whereby Europe bears the majority of the financial cost and we provide the weapons to Ukraine, then that's fine. Okay, Country Boy says, why are Russians not surrendering to Ukraine when seeing all the casualties on the front line? Well, actually, there are a lot that are. Many of them die before they get a chance to surrender. Russia's tactic now is to send three-man teams across the front lines and infiltrate, because it's pretty easy to get a couple of guys through the front lines and get them behind enemy lines, and then have them attack the Ukrainians from the rear. And they're infiltrating that way. That's a little harder for the Ukrainians to find, fix, and finish when it's just 2 or 3 guys at a time. But when they do find those guys, they usually just kill them with drones, and that's all. They don't give them a chance to surrender. Now, I saw a video yesterday where a Ukrainian soldier had a drone with a loudspeaker on it, and they were sending it over Russian lines and saying, if you surrender to us, we will feed you, we will treat you well, and we will eventually repatriate you back to Russia. And they were getting people to surrender to the drone. So it is happening. It's just not at scale. Okay, is Europe dumb enough to bet their future on another Russian pipeline? I hope not. I don't think so. Is Russia stalling partly to improve their warfare technology so as to better achieve their goals? No, They're not stalling because of that. They're stalling because they can't afford to stop fighting at this point. They've fully mobilized a wartime economy in Russia, and turning that back off is going to absolutely crush the Russian economy. You're going to see them sink into a depression, maybe even like deflationary spiral, which is worse than inflationary spiral. And it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. There's not really any easy way they can get out of that corner they've painted themselves into. Pamela says, if that were the case, is it more likely they could become a more formidable foe to the West? I don't think Russia is going to be a military foe to the West probably ever again, ever. Now, they are still going to be an adversary, and they still excel at the asymmetric war that I've talked about, and the information war that I've talked about. That's a foredrawn conclusion. So Russia is putting more and more of its chips into that basket because it knows that it's not going to be a military threat to the United States ever again. Benjamin says, is there a credible prospect of a mutiny or Russian army-led coup to replace Putin's and end this madness? Let's hope. It's certainly possible. There have been some rumblings in Russia about that. Unfortunately, anytime somebody says anything that's even slightly against Vladimir Putin, that guy tends to fall out of a window somewhere. So it's a sort of, is a deterrent to people from doing that. You realize the last guy to try that was Prigozhin, and Prigozhin got terminal altitude cancer and fell out of the sky in his private jet shortly after that. And that was even after he had supposedly made up with Vladimir Putin. Chris says, I wonder if Russia will get all their sales slowed down. Their sales slowed down? Sales of what? I'm not sure what.
Their oil?
Oil sales.
Yeah, oil sales. Yeah.
I got it. Okay. Well, yes, I believe they will. I think that, as I said, the Economist article said that China is sort of stocking up on cheap Russian oil right now. And then they will stop buying Russian oil altogether and get the sanctions removed from the United States, and they get the best of both worlds. Okay, Seth says, Chuck, you complain about welfare queens, but don't blink an eye about many billions being stolen. Oh, I certainly blink an eye about billions being stolen. The thing is, those $100 million that were stolen in Ukraine were not stolen from aid. That money did not come from aid. It came from the Ukrainian taxpayer. And I specifically tracked that down on this last trip to Ukraine and asked high-level people about that. The billions being stolen in Afghanistan, and again, I have a video coming out about that very soon, and the billions being stolen that were stolen in Iraq, that frosts my buttons. And so I certainly would have a problem with Ukraine if they were just stealing billions of American tax dollars, but they're not stealing it. They're trying to use it to survive. And I've literally gone and followed that aid. I've gone to the Polish border, picked up busloads of artillery shells, for example, from the United States, followed them all the way to the front lines and saw that they got to the people that they were supposed to go to. I've seen shipments of drones and spare parts and ammunition and other things that I've literally followed all the way to the front lines. And I've asked the soldiers on the front lines, are you getting the stuff the United States is selling? And they're all saying, yes, we are. We are getting it. Most of the things the United States is giving to Ukraine would be very, very difficult for Ukraine to steal and sell out the back door. I mean, what are you going to do with the HIMARS? Who are you going to sell that to? And you think that it would be possible for Ukraine to sell a HIMARS unit to a Mexican cartel and we wouldn't know about it? Of course we would know about it. And not only that, we could shut that HIMARS down, I believe. So, those major items like that. Now, the real concerning thing, if anything is getting sold out the back door, would be not even small arms. And this same anti-corruption body that just uncovered this $100 million graft thing, and it wasn't $100 million stolen. It was 10 to 15% of that was stolen, because that was the amount of the kickback. That was my understanding of that anyway, my reading of it. But that same anti-corruption body found two different circumstances where Ukrainian soldiers were trying to sell small arms, AK-74s specifically, to interested parties outside of Ukraine. They were caught, they were prosecuted, and they were put in jail for that. And that was small arms. That's not weapons that the United States is giving them, right? The things the United States is giving them that I would be concerned about would be like the man pads, the man portable anti-tank devices that we've given to Ukraine. We've given them lots of them. The thing is, they've used most of them, but those are small enough that they could be smuggled out and could end up somewhere around the world. And maybe when this is all over, something like that might happen. But right now, Ukrainians, believe it or not, actually want to survive. And so most Ukrainians are vehemently against any kind of corruption, because they know that it reduces their chances of survival as a nation. This is what I have found, again, going to Ukraine and speaking to Ukrainians myself about that. Okay, Benjamin says, please could you remind us of the PayPal details for supporting Ukrainian chaplains on the front lines who urgently require body armor? Yeah, Nate, do we still have that banner? Can you find that? Yep, there it is right there. Thank you, Nathan. Good job. Oops. Oh, wait, let's put that back up there for a second. Can you ever trust anyone investigating themselves? Well, that's not exactly how it works. The United States has a large contingent of overseers in Ukraine at the U.S. Embassy. I've met some of them. And those people's job is to ensure that the aid and weapons and things like that that come into Ukraine go where they're supposed to go and don't get, sold off or something like that. They're not responsible for uncovering graft and fraud and abuse in the energy sector or something like that. They're just there to look at American aid and weaponry. Okay, so Micah, they're not investigating themselves. They're being investigated by the United States, and they are working with the United States very closely in that. So there you go. All right, next. After reviewing these war stats today, what type of Russia does Putin think he will have after so many Russians fled before the war and died fighting it? Has anyone shared this with Putin? Don't know. I'm sure that Putin knows that they have a demographic crisis, because he's been putting out messages encouraging Russian women to have more babies. They'll even pay women. They'll give women medals, like military medals, if they have 7 kids or more, and things like that. Like Hero of Russia, if you have 7 kids. They know that they have a demographic problem. That's one of the reasons why they wanted to take over Ukraine, is that's 40-something million people more. That's like a third of the number of people Russia has already. So it would add another third to their population, and that's one of the reasons they want it. Okay, next. Maybe someone on Chuck's team could read that book and pass it on to him to see if it's useful to his commentary. Does anybody know what book Mike is talking about? Full Spectrum Dominance, Totalitarian Democracy in the New World. Okay, I'm going to, Nate, would you write that down and send it to me on Facebook or something? I'll go get that book and read it. I've been looking for another good book. Full Spectrum Dominance. Seth says, Chuck, who pays for your trips overseas? The military industrial complex is $1 trillion industry. Well, lately I pay for them. My recent trip to Ukraine, my trip to Kazakhstan, my trip to Armenia, that came out of my pocket, and that's funded by listeners and viewers like you. So please go to chuckholton.com and support us over there so I can keep traveling. From time to time, I'm able to get one of my mainstream media clients to pay for my travel, whether it's CBN or Newsmax. And they often actually pay for my travel because they're getting reports out of that from me. But a lot of my travel expenses come right out of my pocket. And you guys make that possible because this is kind of my full-time gig now. Next is, thank you, MM. I already said, yeah, I appreciate it. Mike, I need to talk to you. Would you, I need to send you an email. I'm going to send you an email about the nonprofit thing. I got a question for you on that. Okay. All right. I already got to that one, so we'll skip past that one. Klamath River Media says, I saw an interview with Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General. He was saying that Russia is reconstituting itself. Do you agree with this? No, I don't think Russia is reconstituting itself, other than what I said before about replacing their losses with people from outside of Russia, from Africa. I'm going to do a video here shortly about the way that they're recruiting people in Africa, and it's pretty egregious. So they're bringing people from all over the world to try to fill the vacancies that are left by all the people that are being killed. Chris Palacio says, do you think that Trump still blames Ukraine for this war? Yeah, he is. He is still blaming Ukraine for this war. There's no two ways about it. I truly believe that Trump, I'm going to go back to that. Okay, we won't go back to that. How will this affect China's assistance of Russia in its invasion of Ukraine? China wants to keep the war going as long as possible because it dilutes the Americans' ability to pay attention to what's going on in the South China Sea. So they have a sort of a strategic reason, number one, to see the war continue for the reason I stated, but also because a weaker Russia is a boon to China. So as Russia declines, as they are, devastated by this war, China actually benefits from that in many ways. Okay, next. Chuck, you sure have a lot of affinity for hyper woke Europe. No, I don't, and I'm not a liberal. Look, I am disgusted by the woke nonsense you see all over Europe, just like you are. But if you go to Europe and actually talk to people on the ground, like I do, and I did a 12-country tour of Europe a couple years ago, and talked to people in every country around Europe, and what you find is that that you find lots of people who are just as disgusted with the woke nonsense as we are. And you can see that reflected in the election outcomes. For example, in Germany, the AfD, the German right-wing German party, AfD, has been rising, continued to rise, even though they've tried everything to stymie that party. They've tried to arrest them. They've tried to outlaw them. They've tried to do everything they can. And they just keep getting more and more popular because more and more people are fed up with the illegal migration and the DEI and all that kind of stuff. Now, Europe has always been more liberal, if you want to call it that, than the United States. And I'm fine with that. Those people can be liberal if they want to be, because I don't live there and I don't care. I wouldn't live in any of those countries. No way. I'm not going to live in a country that's not a free country. And you can't make an argument to me that Germany, Austria, the UK, especially France, are free countries right now. Those are not free countries. There's no two ways about it. If I'm not free to defend myself, if I get attacked, they're not a free country. And so I don't have an affinity for those countries, but we have an obligation to those countries. And if you hold up Europe to Russia, well, the choice is pretty simple. You have a modern democracy, liberal as it may be, and you have a practically a third world hellhole that is Russia, a totalitarian dictatorship that is Russia. Look, the reason why the Ukrainians wanted to look more like Europe and less like Russia is not because they're all into the trans thing. It's because they're a Christian nation and they want to be free, and they see the freedom that European countries have compared to Russia. And even though the European countries aren't perfect, they're a whole lot better than living in Russia. I promise you that, unless you're one of the elite. So no, I'm just a little bit to the right of Attila the Hun. It's actually kind of funny. I find it really humorous when people accuse me of being a liberal. It's just that I might have a different take on things because I spend most of my year outside of the great United States. I love it when I'm in the United States, but I spend so much time out of the United States that I kind of get to see American culture, politics from the outside in rather than the inside out. And that might give me a different take on some things, okay? MACVG operations are Russian propaganda. I don't know what MACVG operations are. Sorry, I don't know what that is. Micah says, I'm not sure what he meant by nonprofit. Maybe he meant someone else. No, I said Mike, MM. That's Mike Melton. And he donated a nonprofit to us that I'm trying to get in all straightened out, and I just needed to talk to him about it. Question, how does China benefit from Russian loss? Well, back in the 1930s, I believe, Russia took a chunk of land from China that was larger than Ukraine. Okay, it was a very large chunk of land out in the eastern part of Russia. And Russia still holds that land today. China has always said that they plan to take that land back. So that's one reason why they would benefit from a Russian loss. The other reason is it puts them at a distinct disadvantage economically and gives it rises China's sort of level by default. Okay. Next question. As for this war, Chuck is totally in error. It has been self-clear from the very beginning that Russia is the winner. Yeah, that Russia's, let's see. If you call losing 1.4 million men dead, wounded, captured, and missing a win, and to do that, to lose that many men, to take over 20% of Ukraine, when your goal was to take over all of Ukraine, and you call that a win, and Ukraine is, Russia is losing 10 times as many men every year as Ukraine is. You call that a win? Russia's economy is in shambles. So is Ukraine's, but Ukraine's will rebound very quickly because it's plugged into Europe. It's very hard to make a case because to win, Russia has to accomplish its objectives, which was to take over Ukraine. And they haven't done that. They haven't even taken Donetsk and Luhansk, which they controlled most of before the war started. And so at the rate they're going, it's going to take them more than 65 years just to take over the rest of Luhansk and Donetsk. So it's, I don't know how you call that a win. That just doesn't look like a win to me. Ukraine, on the other hand, a win for Ukraine is Ukraine gets to survive in some form. And so far, Ukraine is surviving. So far, Ukraine is actually starting to gain momentum against Russia on the battlefield. So I think the only real winner from this war is going to be the United States. Because for a relatively small amount of our annual military budget, we got to observe a combat laboratory in real world conditions that put American firepower up against Russian firepower and for the first time, and actually gave us the data that we needed to find out where we were weak and where we were strong and where we needed to change. Ukraine has lost something like 60 to 70,000 men fighting Russia. And that's certainly bad for Ukraine, but it's good for America because America hasn't lost one single troop in this war, not one. And so to have gained that much intel data and to have degraded one of our largest adversaries to the point where they will never be a threat to us ever again, at the loss of literally zero of our troops, and now to be selling the aid to Europe, which goes to Ukraine, so we're actually making money on the war. That looks like America is the only winner in this war so far. But Ukraine hasn't lost because they're still Ukraine. And as long as there's a Ukrainian that's breathing, I think that will be the case. And Russia just, if you got anything out of today's live, it should be that Russia simply does not have the numbers to take over Ukraine at the rate that they're going. That, look, it's not going to get easier as they push further into Ukraine. They're going to be farther away from their logistics nodes. They're going to have to transport ammunition and soldiers and everything even farther into Ukraine as the front line moves west. And that means that their burden gets heavier as time goes on, not to mention that fortress belt that Ukraine has built that's going to be very, very costly for Russia to try to take. And that is why Russia is trying so hard to full court press on the Trump administration, because they know they have a useful idiot there that will push Ukraine into a bad deal. And that's really the only way Ukraine loses in this thing, is if they get pushed into a bad deal. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Okay. All right. I think that's all for the questions for today. Thank you very much for all your questions and comments, even the ones that disagree with me. I mean, I'm all about having discussion, and that's one of the things that makes this venue popular, is that we can actually have a discussion about it. If you want to have face-to-face discussions with me, go become a member at chuckholton.com. We do a monthly phone call where you can get on the call and like a Zoom call and actually interact with me, talk to me both directions. And that's very popular. You get lots of extra content. You get early access to a lot of our videos. So thank you very much for everything, for watching and for supporting us. And we will see you again next time. Take care.